Well, welcome back to Patrirachs and Prophets. I really hope you've been enjoying this series so far. Our presentation for this day is called Can a Virus Destroy the World? Can a virus destroy the world? Well, the answer is yes. However, we need to ask these next three questions. Which virus? How? And when? And before answering these questions, or answering at least the first question, we also need to understand what is a virus. What is a virus? Well, let's find out what's a virus. According to our good friend Google, it says an infective agent that typically consists of a nucleic acid molecule in a protein coat is too small to be seen in likely microscopy and is able to multiply only within the living cells of the host. You can tell that this is something out of my field, very scientific. But really what's interesting here is when you go 2 steps below, there's a very interesting definition of the word virus. And it says this: a harmful or corrupting influence. A harmful or corrupting influence. The virus of cruelty that is latent in all human beings. That's just an example, right? A virus, a harmful, corrupting influence, all right? What is interesting here is that there is another word that comes to my mind when I think of the word virus, and that is the word poison. Poison. Let's look at the definition of poison. Well, there's a bunch of definitions that Google gives us, but what is interesting is that when you translate the word poison in its original language, Latin, you get the word virus. The word is virus. At the bottom of the screen you see there, where we took that from, virus. So what we can get from that is that these two words are virtually the same. And I want you to keep these in mind, as this definition will make sense as we keep going to answer our first question today, which is, which virus will destroy the world? Well, there's a story of two nations recorded in history. It's a story of the Moabites and the Israelites. Well, on one side, on the left-hand side, you've got the Mesha Stele, also known as the Moabite stone. This is the remains of archaeology, which gives us an evidence of the existence of the Moabites, which were one of the Canaanites in the time of history. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the Merneptah Stele, also known as the Israel Stele, which this one comes from Egypt. This is a stone on which the Egyptian pharaoh at the time had written his victory over the many nations that were around the Canaanites area. And Israel was actually mentioned in this stone, and this is an evidence, archaeology evidence, that tells us of the existence of these nations dating all the way back from 840, I should say, before Christ, as shown on the screen. Well, the story goes something like this. There was a man named Balaam. Now, this man was a prophet of the true God back in the history, and this is the God of the Bible. However, this man had decided to put his desires more into earthly things, and so his interest in working with God was not so much there. It was more of gaining worldly pleasure, worldly desires, worldly riches. And so that's a bit of the background of Balaam. And so there was this king named Balak, and Balak was the king of the Moabites. Now Balak had a serious issue because the Israelites had just come out of Egypt, and they'd been just going around and just taking down one nation after another. And so Balak he's thinking, man, how am I going to deal with these people? They're so different. They're out of this world, and they've got something special about them that is winning them these battles. And so he thought of somebody that he knew, Balaam. And he said, I want to call Balaam, and I want to ask him to help me take out this nation. And so Balak sends his most honored princes with some, with a message for Balaam. And then he says to Balaam, come here and I will honor you for as long as you curse these people for me and we destroy them. And so Balaam, when he received the message, he says, well, I'm going to inquire of the Lord. And you come to see, in this story that Balaam is actually playing a bit of a show here, as if like really he believes or really he wants to do God's will. But really what he really wants is he wants to get the worldly riches, the worldly wealth that is being presented or promised to him by Balak. And so he goes and consults with God. God tells him, not to go and curse the Israelites because they are blessed people. And so he tells the princes go back to Balak and report the message. And Balak sends them back again. This time, the more honorable princes go to see Balaam. And not only that, this time they also bring him, even a more rewarding sort of a prize to entice him to come. And so Balaam, once again, he goes and he says, let me go and inquire of the Lord, because he says, look, it doesn't matter how much you're going to give me. I'm not going to go and curse these people just because you want to give me so much wealth. And Balaam here, once again, he's playing a bit of a show, as if like, as if he's showing like he doesn't want it, but actually he really wants it, but he's just acting, as he's playing a game, he's playing a game. And so he goes and inquires of the Lord. And this is what God tells him. God tells Balaam and says, this time, if these princes come and call you in the morning, if they call you in the morning, then you go with them. Now, Balaam had a selective, hearing issue here, because all he heard is go with them. Because the funny thing is that in the morning, the princes did not come to call Balaam, but he got up and he went. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Balaam, as it says in Numbers chapter 22 and verse 22, because he went without the condition that was put on it. And so Balaam went, took his donkey and a couple of his servants, he went down. And as he's going down, the Lord appears in front of his donkey, and the donkey fears for his life, and so he falls and hurts Balaam. Now this happens 3 times, and every time when this happens, Balaam will hit his donkey. And the 3rd time when this happened, the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and the donkey started speaking to Balaam and said, hey man, why are you hitting me so much? What have I ever done to you? And Balaam's like, well, you are disgracing me, And then they enter into this argument. Can you imagine animal and man enter into a verbal argument? And before you know it, God appears, to Balaam, and with a sword on his hand, he said, look, if it wasn't for your donkey, I would have killed you by now, because, Balaam was going against God's will. And what the interesting thing here is that God doesn't necessarily want to kill Balaam. God was intervening to preserve the life of Balaam, because he knows what was inside of Balaam's heart. And so as a father figure, he's trying to prevent him from falling down the ditch that he's digging himself. Balaam is digging himself. And so he says, well, you go. But if you go, you're only going to say the words that I will put in your mouth. Eventually, Balaam went. And as he got there, the king says to him, hey, man, I sent you the most honorable princes of my country twice, and you did not come. What's the matter? You think I can't bring you up to honor? You think I can't give you worldly riches? And so Balaam, once again, put up a show. It's like, hey, I'm only going to do what the Lord says I'm going to do. Where before, he did not do it. And so they put up, a bunch of, burning sort of areas where they gave sacrifices to bulls. There were 7 altars built. And so Balaam says, wait for me here. I'm going to go and inquire of the Lord. And he goes and inquires of the Lord, and the Lord says to him, tell them this. And he comes back to Balak, and instead of cursing the Israelite, Balaam actually blesses them. Now this happens twice, right? And every time this happens, Balak the king gets, frustrated. He says, hey, I've called you here to curse people, and you're blessing them, By all means, don't curse them and don't bless them either, And so the third time when this was about to happen, Balaam realized that there was no point going to check on what God would say, because Balaam already knew that God was not going to curse the Israelites. And so he chose not to go the third time, and this time he went, and then this time actually he gave a prophecy. He blessed them, but also gave a prophecy on the Israelites. And the interesting thing is that after this, Balak was so fed up, and he's like, I don't want to hear any more of this. And so he asked Balaam to leave. And Balaam leaves. But you see, Balaam leaves because the whole time while he was there, when he was speaking for the Israelites, he was not speaking, about, on his own terms, and what he wanted to say. He was actually in control by the Spirit of God who was speaking through him. So when Balaam got home, the Spirit of God had left him. And then he realized, man, I just lost all these worldly riches. So he went back. And now this time, Balaam went back with a very evil plan to destroy the Israelites. Destroy the Israelites. And you can find this story in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, all the way to 31, or in chapter 21 and 22 of the book, Patrirachs and Prophets, that we have for you free of charge in the description below of this presentation. Now, how is this topic relevant to us today? How is this story recording, this historical event, how is that relevant to us today? Can a virus destroy the world? Is still the question out there. Well, let's see how history can repeat itself today. We learn from this story that Balaam knew that the prosperity of Israel depended upon their obedience to God, and that there was no way to cause their overthrow but by seducing them into sin. And then furthermore, it says in the book Patrirachs and Prophets, only the river Jordan lay between them and the promised land. In other words, they were just like, a view away from the promised land. But amid these attractive surroundings, they were to encounter an evil, listen to this, more deadly than the mighty host of armed men or wild beasts of the wilderness. Friends, the thing that the Israelites were to come across with was more deadly than a whole army full of men and wild beasts that you can ever think of. Well, what is it? The plan. How did they do it? How did Balaam decide to do it? Well, the plan proposed by Balaam was to separate them from God by enticing them into idolatry. It says, if they could be led to engage in the licentious worship, pay attention to this word, very important, licentious worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, the omnipotent protector will become their enemy, and they would soon fall a prey to the fierce, warlike nations around them. Isn't that interesting? And what is the result of this? Well, here's what it says about the results of this evil plan. It says, it was not long before the poison had spread like a deadly infection through the camp of Israel. The what? The poison. Did they just say poison like a deadly infection? Well, even more so interesting, it says, the rulers and the leading men were among the first. Keep this in mind, because this will come up again towards the end of our presentation. Well, let's get it right. Let's get this thing right. It seems to be that to engage in the licentious worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, which were the ancient gods of the Canaanite nations, the licentious worship of these gods equals the poison that spread like a deadly infection among the Israelites. The poison that we're talking about here is none other than the licentious worship of these ancient gods. Well, I think we need to ask the question, who is Baal and Ashtaroth? Who are these ancient gods of the Israelites? Of the Canaanite nation. Now, I want to say this, I want to put a disclaimer right here, and I say, some of the images and or explanations of this part of the presentation may be graphical for some of our viewers. All right? And this is what it is. We start with Ashtaroth, or Ashtoreth, and also some, call her Ishtar. Well, who is these gods? And he says, this person, this ancient god was the corresponding female deity worshipped in Babylonian under the name Ishtar as the goddess of battles and victories, in which character she also appears among the Philistines, war spoils being dedicated to her. Her symbol was the Asherah, or a wooden column, or an image resembling the sacred tree. Pay attention to this, an image resembling the sacred tree of the Assyrians, the worship of which she is very commonly coupled with that of Baal. So she shares something in common here with Baal, right? Furthermore, let's go. This is the Asherah pole. This is the sacred tree that is referred to in this description of this goddess. And also it says, she is the goddess of love and sexuality, and thus fertility. She is responsible for all life. The goddess of war, she is often shown winged and bearing arms. Her third aspect is celestial. She is the planet Venus, the morning and evening star. Now, I've highlighted some of these words because these will come back in our presentations. Very important to remember this as we'll come back on this. So, this is Ashtaroth. Well, what is it really about her? How did you worship this goddess back in those times? Well, they will pull up, there will be a tree, like this sacred tree, or an image representing this tree, and people will come around dancing, dancing with all kinds of music instruments playing as in trance music, with alcohol and led by Ishtar priestess who were prostitutes. And they will participate in all kinds of public sexual activities with both young and old, male and female. All these was a demonstration of worship to their goddess of love and sexuality and fertility. Worshipped in different nations too. As you have heard, one of them was Babylon. The other one was the Moabite, the Medians, the Amorite, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and even more. This goddess was very famous in many nations back in those days. Well, let's have a look at Baal. Who is Baal? The word Baal means Lord. Baal was the supreme male deity of the Phoenician and Canaanite nations, and probably is to be identified with the Babylonian Baal. Once again, Baal was not just in one nation; it was in many nations. And this is the remain of the temple of Baal Shaman in Syria. Now, also, Baal worshipped in many ancient Middle Eastern communities, especially among the Canaanites, as already been mentioned, who apparently considered him a fertility deity, meaning that this guy Ishtar share the very same characteristics. Baal designated the universal god of fertility, and in that capacity, his title was Prince, Lord of the earth. He was also called the Lord of rain and dew, the two forms of moisture that were indispensable for the fertility soil in Canaan. We'll come back to this. What's even more, it says that he also calls or presents himself as he who rides on the clouds, and also as the Lord of heavens. Now, you've got an image there of what was represented of the god Baal. You see like a sort of a human figure, but with the head of a goat with horns, holding a child. What is interesting about this is that it is very similar to the Baphomet statue, which is the representation of Satan himself. This is actually from the Satanic Church today. And what you see is a male figure sort of looking with a sort of goat head with horns and kids by his side. Why? Because, well, apart from the very similar style of worship that Ishtar also had as a goddess of fertility, in the very most degrading public intercourses, just as she had, this worship of Baal also including the sacrificial ceremonies of children. Again, all these ceremonies was a demonstration of worship to Baal, who also worshipped in different nations. Was worshipped in different nations, as we mentioned, such as Babylonians, the Canaanites, the Moabites, the Philistines, and the list goes on. And this was their tradition. This was their God's style of worship in those days for the Canaanites. Now, I want to highlight something here about these people. These gods somewhat have compared themselves to the God of the Bible. And listen to this, right? This is a bit of comparison. The God of the Bible calls himself Jesus, Jesus the giver of life. This is in Psalm 36, verse 9, and John 1, 3 and 4. Jesus refers to himself as a giver of life. And Baal and Ishtar, say that they are responsible for all life, or call himself the Lord of rain and dew. In the Bible, Jesus, he says, I am the bright morning star, Revelation 22, verse 16. Whereas Ishtar represents herself as the morning and evening star, in comparison to, in the character of Venus, the planet Venus, which appear in the morning and also in the evening as the morning and evening star. Jesus calls himself, Jesus says that the earth is the Lord's. In Psalm verse 24, verse 1. Baal tells himself that he is the prince of the earth. Jesus is coming in the clouds, says in Isaiah, in the book of Revelation. Baal is he who rides on the clouds. Jesus is the Lord of heaven and earth. Baal is the Lord of the heavens. Now, I don't know if you remember the first presentation that Alex presented in the book, in the series Patrirachs and Prophets. But there's something that rings a bell here, and this is the phrase that comes to mind. I will be like the Most High. Now, who said this? Well, let's discover. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into the heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The stars again. I will sit on the mount of the congregation. On the farther side of the north, I will ascend above the heights of what? The clouds. I will be like the Most High. This is the most ancient angel you can ever find in the history of this world, Lucifer, who compares himself to Christ and says, I will be like him. Hence, in this recent comparison that we had, we can see that all these deities in the Canaanite nations were wanting to be like the God of the Israel, of the Israelites. I will be like the Most High. So, just to recap, we've answered our first question, which virus will destroy the world? And that is simply the poison of licentious worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. So, after learning all that, the question still remains, how is this relevant to us today? How is this relevant to us today? Well, maybe the question we should ask is, how do people engage in the licentious worship of Baal and Ashtaroth today? How do people engage in such a thing today? Once again, I'm going to put a disclaimer there that this is a view on religion and spirituality, not about individuals and or organizations. All right? So how does this happen? Well, let's finally have a look. Here's a song written by this artist called Christophilus. And the song is entitled Baal in Hollywood. What is interesting about this song, it sounds very much like the kind of music that was played in the worship of Baal back then, with a very trance, spiritual kind of, music, like all different instruments playing in a trance kind of, setup. Furthermore, what you get is the seal of Ashtaroth, which is being sold today, in merchandises such as, T-shirts, jewelries, and more. This is one from Amazon, another one from AliExpress. You can buy them online, wherever you are in this world. Furthermore, you can see that this is an evidence that people to this day are still worshiping these deities, these goddesses and small capital letter, small letter God, named Baal, in this day and age. Now, you remember this, the Asherah pole that belonged, or that was a representation of the god Ishtar, on which people will go and dance on. Well, what is interesting here is that it is called the Asherah pole. Not only that it needs to be a sacred tree, but it can be also an image representing this sacred tree on which they will dance and do all sorts of things. Well, what do we see that today? Does this ring a bell? Pole dancing? And where do we get pole dancing a lot these days? It's not just in the gentleman club where men go to view women, dressed in ways that are very sexual and do all sort of things. But more so, even today, pole dancing has become some sort of a leisure or a sport, where women and sometimes men will go and practice and learn how to do these things, not to, entertain people in a gentleman's club, but, to do it for their own fitness. But it's done with music around, still a representation of this worship of the goddess Asherah or Ishtar. Furthermore, this worship of Ishtar is also seen in movies, in sex scenes. Why? Because, this is first of all public, just like the many viewers online of pornography and all kind of things. What is interesting about this, brothers and sisters, is that there is an endless X-rated movies available online, but not even just the X-rated movies. There are many movies which still have sex scenes in the movies. These have been made for public access and available in public, which is the very same, repetition or representation of the way the people back in the Canaanite nations will worship their goddess Ishtar by practicing these things in public. Well, there's more. In the corporate world, we have this company called Ishtar Company. And this is what he says. He says Ishtar was the name of a Mesopotamian goddess and was named was name of the gates and main entrance into the great city of Babylon. So these people are very much aware of these things. They're not hiding it. It's out there, brothers and sisters. There is still a worship of the goddess Ishtar or Baal. And Ishtar Company is actually part of the group, the Barris Group Company, which is a multi-million-dollar company operating in oil and all this sort of stuff. Well, what about the food industry? Does this ring a bell? This company called Starbucks. Now, I want us to assess the picture or the logo of Starbucks. Once again, as I mentioned, this is the view on religion and spirituality and not about individuals and organizations. Let's understand the logo of Starbucks. Well, seems to be a woman. It started, a bit more graphic, where the Starbucks, owners, in their story of the logo, mentioned that they view these some sort of mythical mermaid with two tails. Now, we all know that mermaids only have one tail, but apparently this is a mythical mermaid with two tails, right? What is interesting about this is that this mermaid has a crown and has a star above her crown, right? But not only that, she's not really, fully dressed as well. I don't know if mermaids dress themselves, but this rings a bell to me. And when I looked up, the goddess Ishtar, this is what comes up. Astarte, also named as Ishtar or Ashtaroth, who is the goddess having a crown on her head, with a star on her head, dressed up very loosely as some type of prostitute, and looking very much the same like this Starbucks logo. Now, I want to highlight on something else. The Starbucks logo claimed that a mermaid has two tails, but we know, as mentioned earlier, that mermaids only have one tail. What was something that we knew Ishtar to be the goddess of? Well, Ishtar was the goddess of fertility and sexuality. Now, you can just let your mind or your imagination goes, going, places. When you come to realize that in the 1987 to 1992 picture of the Starbucks logo, I would like to suggest to you perhaps that the two tails that you're seeing is perhaps not two tails, but two legs. And when you start thinking about it, when a woman, puts herself in that position, what could that mean to a man? And so I'm not going to go too graphical on that, but I just want to give you a bit of, in-depth understanding of that. But even what is more so is that this picture of Astarte or Ishtar is also a very same, representation of the Baphomet statue, which is of the Satanic, church. What is interesting here is that you've got the Baphomet statue has also some sort of a crown with the horns that he has, and he has a star above his head too. And what is interesting too is that you've got the women, the woman in an Ishtar picture who has one of her hands up and the other one down. The morning and evening star. Same you see in the Baphomet statue, you got one of the hands up, one of the hands down. And you got the two keys on the side representing the fertility, goddess, representation of these two. Let's move a bit forward so that we can finish up with this topic today and get a full understanding of what it is. Well, there's been a plan to exhibit a model of the Temple of Baal, also known as the Temple of Baal, in Times Square or Union Square. Now, this is not something made up. This is actually from the New York Post that was put up in 2016, if I'm correct. Now, this is the Temple of Baal in Palmyra, Syria. Now, actually, this has been destroyed by ISIS. Listen to what the New York Post said. It says, a towering arch of an ancient temple in Palmyra, Syria, that has been mostly destroyed by ISIS terrorists will be recreated by a huge 3D printer and put on display in New York City this spring, officials said on Monday. The life-size model of the original 2,000-year-old structure known as the Ark of the Temple of Baal will stand approximately 48 feet high and 20 feet wide. This is the life-size model. The temple, dedicated in 32 AD to the Mesopotamian god Baal, attracted 150,000 tourists yearly until 2011, when the civil war in Syria began. Right? So we have here people in the world, corporate people in the world, leaders in the world, who are behind putting up this image, this life-size model of the temple, or at least the entrance of the Temple of Baal, in a lot of cities around the world. Furthermore, it says, the institutions plan to construct approximately 1,000 such versions of the arch in cities around the world, literally erecting temples of Baal in many major cities around the world. 1,000 of such. 1,000 of such. Well, where are these temples today? Where are these temples today? Or, as you said, representations of the Temple of Baal today? Well, before you start going crazy and thinking that this is all a joke, look at this. It has always been already appeared in New York, in the USA, New York. It's also appeared in London. It has also appeared in Dubai, in Italy, Florence, and is going in many, many more cities around the world. What is interesting about this, as we had learned earlier in the history, in the story of Baal, or the Moabite at least, and the Israelites, is that the leaders among the Israelites were the first to be affected by this deadly disease. And friends, here we are, and we can see, even on these pictures, that it is the leaders who are standing behind this. Now, whether they are aware of it or not, somebody is aware of it, somebody is behind this, and somebody really knows what is going on. Somebody knows what is going on, friends. There you have it, friends. What more can be said? What more can be said? Well, let's recap. We then need to ask these three questions to remember where we came from and where we are right now. Well, which varies? It is the licentious worship of the Canaanite gods. How? By engaging in the licentious worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. When? Right now, and more in the future, as we've seen right now already, but even more in the future. Well, how do we know it in the future? This is what it says in the book Patrirachs and Prophets. It says, as we approach the close of time, meaning that the close of time of this earth history, as the people of God stand upon the borders of heaven, of heavenly Canaan, Satan will, as of old, redouble his efforts to prevent them from entering the goodly land. He lays in his snares every soul. It is not the ignorant and uncultured merely that need to be guarded. He will prepare his temptations for those in the what? In the highest positions, in the most holy office. This is not just, for leaders in the world, but this is even for those who believe to be very, spiritual, especially in the Christian religion. Those in the most holy office, those in the highest position, all our world leaders and religious leaders, they will be also impacted by this if they do not watch out. If he can lead them to pollute their souls, he can through them destroy many. By worldly friendships, the claim, the charms of beauty, by pleasure-seeking, mirth, feasting, the wine cup, and so much more, friends. These can be the results of many leaders and many of us today. What we know already is that this is going to happen, and what we can do today is to prevent ourselves from falling into this trap. Well, this is what he says again. He says, sensual indulgence weakens the mind and debases the soul. The moral and intellectual powers are benumbed and paralyzed by the gratification of the animal propensities. This, by the way, can be confirmed scientifically, that when we indulge in such thing, our brains, our minds get weakened and benumbed and paralyzed. Indeed. Well, what can we do to not be caught up with this deadly virus? What can we do? The Bible says in 1 Peter 5 verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. It doesn't say that the devil is a lion, but he is like one. Meaning he portrays himself to be dangerous, and he is dangerous to a certain degree. But friends, for as long as we lean on God, for as long as we abide in the principles given to us in the Bible by the God of heaven, friends, we can prevent ourselves to fall into the hands of the devil. Furthermore, it says in Philippians 4 verse 8, one of my favorite verses, it says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So the Bible is giving us a way out, to not put our minds into things that debase our minds and weakens our minds. But instead of thinking of things that will help us to overcome the battles, the deadly poisonous virus ahead or in front of us today in the worship of Baal and Ashtoreth. Friends, here is your message today. We've gone through this presentation. We have asked the question, can a virus destroy the world? Well, we've answered it. And we've seen how this virus will destroy the world. How will this virus will destroy many human beings. How this virus will destroy and can impact even our leaders. Will you today make the choice on standing on God's side and keeping your mind guarded to dwell upon the lovely, heavenly, and beautiful things that the Bible invites us to dwell upon, and preserve our minds from being debased in this so immoral world? Well, I hope you've been blessed, and I pray that we'll see you again in Patrirachs and Prophets. God bless you. Hi there, Jonathan here from Voices in the Cities. I really hope you enjoyed this message. If you would like to dig more, check out the description right below. Don't forget to subscribe right here so that you don't miss out on any videos we post. And then if you want to watch more, right up there, next video. See you next time.